There was a time when the winds of the Wild West carried stories that were as untamed as the land itself. In a dusty town called Redemption Ridge, nestled between endless plains and jagged mountains, there lived an old cowboy named Silas. He was a man whose face bore the marks of countless sunsets and harsh winters, his hands calloused from years spent wrangling cattle and breaking horses. The townsfolk often whispered about him behind closed doors, their voices laced with both pity and disdain. Silas had once been a legend in these parts, a gunslinger with quick reflexes and a heart as wild as the frontier. But now, he was just a shadow of his former self, wandering the streets of Redemption Ridge like a ghost from another era. His clothes were worn thin by time, his boots scuffed from too many miles walked alone. Yet what set him apart most was not his weathered appearance, but his companion, a blind horse named Midnight. Midnight was no ordinary steed. Once a proud stallion with a coat darker than the night sky, he now stumbled through life guided only by memory and trust. The townspeople ridiculed Silas for keeping such a useless animal. "Why don't you put him out of his misery?" they'd ask, shaking their heads as if Silas were the one who didn't understand. But Silas refused to listen. To him, Midnight wasn't just a horse. He was a friend, a partner, and a reminder of better days. Little did they know, however, that this unlikely duo would soon become the saviors of Redemption Ridge. The summer heat clung to the air like a second skin, turning every breath into a laborious task. Dust devils danced across the barren plains outside town, swirling clouds of dirt so thick they blotted out the horizon. Redemption Ridge itself seemed parched, its wooden buildings cracked and splintered for months without rain. The well in the center of town had long run dry, forcing the residents to ration water like it was gold dust. It was on one sweltering afternoon that trouble came riding into town, not on hooves or wheels, but on wings. A great storm of locusts descended upon Redemption Ridge, darkening the skies and consuming everything in their path. Fields turned to wastelands overnight. Crops reduced to stubble before anyone could react. Panic spread to the town faster than the insects themselves, and soon shouts echoed from every corner. "We're doomed!" cried Mrs. Harper, clutching her apron as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Our food is gone. Our livelihoods are ruined." Sheriff Thompson stood at the edge of the square, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He looked weary, his usual confidence shaken by the sheer scale of the disaster. "We need to find new land," he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "There's nothing left here for us." But where could they go? The surrounding territory was hostile, filled with bandits and hostile tribes. And even if they managed to escape the immediate danger, how would they survive without supplies? As the townsfolk gathered to discuss their plight, Silas remained silent, sitting alone on a rickety bench near the saloon. Midnight stood beside him, his head lowered as if listening to the murmurs of despair around them. No one paid much attention to the old cowboy. Why should they? What wisdom could he possibly offer after all these years? But deep within Silas, something stirred. It wasn't hope exactly, nor was it fear. It was more like a spark of determination, buried beneath layers of loneliness and regret. He thought back to the days when he and Midnight had roamed free, unburdened by judgment or ridicule. Those memories fueled him now, giving him strength when others saw only defeat. That night, under a sky scattered with stars like diamonds, Silas made his decision. He approached Sheriff Thompson, who was pacing outside the jailhouse, trying to devise a plan. "Sheriff," Silas said softly, his voice raspy from disuse. Thompson stopped mid-stride, surprised to see the old man speaking up. "What is it, Silas?" "I think I might have a way to save this town," Silas replied, his tone steady despite the weight of the words. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think you can do what none of us have been able to figure out?" Instead of answering directly, Silas simply pointed toward Midnight. "He knows the land better than any map. If we let him lead us, we might stand a chance." The idea was met with laughter from those nearby. "A blind horse leading us to salvation?" scoffed one man. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Silas didn't flinch. "You don't believe me, that's fine. But if you want to survive, you'll give me a shot. Midnight has a gift. You just have to trust him." Reluctantly, Sheriff Thompson agreed to hear Silas out. After all, they had nothing to lose. As the rest of the townsfolk settled down to sleep, or attempt to, given the circumstances, Silas prepared for the journey ahead. He packed provisions sparingly, knowing they wouldn't last long. Then, with a gentle pat on Midnight's neck, he whispered, "Let's show them what we're made of, boy." At dawn, the group assembled at the outskirts of town. Men, women, and children alike joined the exodus, each carrying whatever they could salvage from their homes. Horses and wagons were scarce. So many walked alongside Silas and Midnight, their feet kicking up clouds of dust with every step. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both seen and unseen. For hours, they followed Midnight as he navigated the terrain with uncanny precision. Though his eyes were clouded and sightless, his ears picked up subtle sounds, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, and his nose detected faint scents carried on a breeze. Slowly but surely, he led them away from the devastation of Redemption Ridge and deeper into the wilderness. By midday, the temperature soared, making the trek unbearable. Tempers flared as tempers often do under such conditions. "Why are we following this old coot and his broken-down horse?" grumbled one man, wiping sweat from his brow. "This whole thing feels cursed." Others nodded in agreement, their doubts growing louder with each passing mile. Even Sheriff Thompson began to question whether Silas truly knew what he was doing. But Silas remained calm, his faith in Midnight unwavering. "Just a little farther," he assured them, though his own throat felt parched and raw. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in hues of orange and purple, Midnight came to a halt. The townsfolk gathered around, expecting another argument or complaint. Instead, Silas dismounted and knelt beside the ground, running his fingers through the soil. "This is it," he announced, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "Dig here." Again, the crowd erupted in disbelief. "Are you mad?" someone shouted. "There's nothing here but dirt." But Silas shook his head. "Trust me. Dig." With nothing else to do, they obeyed, using makeshift tools in their bare hands. They dug until their muscles burned and their spirits wavered. Hours passed, and still there was no sign of anything worthwhile. Just when some began to mutter about abandoning the effort, a shovel struck something solid beneath the surface. "Water!" cried a young girl, her voice trembling with excitement. Sure enough, the sound of liquid gushing forth confirmed their discovery. A hidden spring bubbled up from the earth, cool and clear, offering relief beyond measure. The townsfolk cheered, their exhaustion melting away in the face of this unexpected miracle. They drank greedily, filling buckets and canteens until their thirst was quenched. Some collapsed onto ground, laughing and crying simultaneously. Others hugged Silas, their gratitude overwhelming. But Silas merely smiled, his gaze fixed on Midnight. "Told you he had a gift," he murmured. In the days that followed, the townsfolk rebuilt their lives around the newfound spring. They constructed shelters using materials scavenged from Redemption Ridge and started planting seeds salvaged from the locust attack. Life wasn't easy, but it was bearable thanks to the water source that had saved them all. As weeks turned into months, the story of Silas and Midnight spread far and wide. Travelers passing through marveled at the tale of the blind horse who had led a desperate people to salvation. Songs were written, paintings commissioned, and legends born, all centered on the unlikely heroism of an old cowboy and his faithful steed. Yet Silas never sought recognition. He continued living quietly, tending to Midnight, and enjoying the simple pleasures of peace. One evening, as the stars twinkled above and crickets serenaded the night, Sheriff Thompson approached him with a question. "Why did you do it, Silas?" the sheriff asked. "Why risk everything for a town that treated you so poorly?" Silas chuckled, leaning against a fence post. "Because, Sheriff, sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against others. They're fought against ourselves. And besides," he glanced at Midnight, who nuzzled his shoulder affectionately, "sometimes the ones who seem weakest turn out to be the strongest." Unbeknownst to everyone, however, there was one final twist to the story. Long after Silas had passed on, leaving behind only whispers of his deeds, historians uncovered evidence suggesting that Midnight hadn't acted purely by instinct. Hidden documents revealed that Silas had trained the horse meticulously during their travels, teaching him to recognize specific patterns in nature that indicated the presence of underground water sources. This knowledge, combined with Midnight's heightened senses, had enabled him to perform feats that seemed almost magical. Thus, the legend of Silas and Midnight endured, not as mere survivors of hardship, but as symbols of resilience, loyalty, and the power of believing in those who others write off as lost causes. And so, the winds of the Wild West carried their story onward, inspiring generations yet unborn to look beyond appearances and embrace the potential hidden within every soul. The days in Redemption Ridge stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. With the discovery of the hidden spring, the town began to flourish once more. The land, though scarred by the locusts, was slowly healing under the care of the townsfolk. Crops were replanted, and the first green shoots emerged from the soil, a testament to the resilience of both man and nature. But beneath this newfound prosperity, tension simmered. Not everyone in Redemption Ridge had embraced the change with open arms. There were those who resented Silas for his role in their salvation. They saw him as an interloper, a relic of a past they wished to forget. Among these dissenters was a man named Jasper Cole, a wealthy rancher whose lands had been among the hardest hit by the locusts. Jasper had always viewed Silas with disdain, seeing him as nothing more than a vagrant clinging to a useless horse. Now, with Silas elevated to near-mythical status, Jasper's jealousy festered into something darker. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Jasper approached Sheriff Thompson in the saloon. The air inside was thick with the scent of whiskey and tobacco, and a low murmur of conversation filled the room. Jasper leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "Sheriff, it's time we dealt with that old fool and his blind beast," he hissed. "He's had his moment in the sun. It's time to move on." Sheriff Thompson frowned, his brow furrowing as he considered Jasper's words. "Jasper, you know as well as I do what Silas did for us. He saved this town. We owe him." "Owe him?" Jasper interrupted, his voice rising. "What we owe him is nothing. He's a burden now, Sheriff, a reminder of our desperation. People are starting to look to him instead of me, instead of you. This town needs leadership, not fairy tales." Reluctantly, Sheriff Thompson agreed to at least keep an eye on Silas, not out of malice, but out of duty to maintain peace in town. Little did they know, their actions would set off a chain of events that would test the very fabric of Redemption Ridge. The next morning, Silas awoke to find Midnight restless. The horse paced back and forth, his ears twitching nervously. Silas scratched Midnight's neck, trying to soothe him. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "What's got you so spooked?" Midnight didn't calm down. Instead, he turned toward the edge of property, his nostrils flaring. Silas followed his gaze and noticed something unusual, a faint trail of hoofprints leading away from the spring. His heart sank. Someone had been tampering with the water source. Without hesitation, Silas saddled Midnight and rode toward the spring. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth. As they neared the spot, Silas dismounted and approached cautiously. What he found made his blood run cold. The spring, which had been their lifeline, was being diverted. A crude system of trenches and pipes had been constructed, siphoning the water away from Redemption Ridge and toward Jasper Cole's ranch. Silas clenched his fists, anger bubbling within him. He knew immediately who was behind this. Jasper had never been one to play fair, and now his greed had driven him to sabotage the very thing that had saved them all. Silas debated whether to confront Jasper directly or seek help from the sheriff. But deep down, he knew neither option would solve the problem, not entirely. Jasper wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, and Silas couldn't let that happen. By midday, Silas had formulated a plan. He returned to Redemption Ridge, gathering supplies and tools. Some of the townsfolk noticed his preparations and asked questions, but Silas remained tight-lipped. He trusted them, yes, but this was a battle he needed to fight alone, at least for now. That night, under cover of darkness, Silas and Midnight set out once more. The stars above twinkled like diamonds scattered across velvet, casting a soft glow over the landscape. Silas navigated the terrain with precision, guided by Midnight's uncanny sense of direction. They reached Jasper's ranch just as the moon crested the horizon, bathing everything in silvery light. The diversion system was more elaborate than Silas had anticipated, a network of channels and dams designed to funnel the water toward Jasper's fields. Silas worked methodically, dismantling the contraption piece by piece. Midnight stood watch, his head raised high, alert to any signs of danger. Silas could feel the weight of the task pressing down on him, but he refused to falter. This wasn't just about saving the spring. It was about protecting the future of Redemption Ridge. As dawn broke, Silas finished his work. The water flowed freely again, returning to its natural course. Exhausted but satisfied, Silas mounted Midnight and prepared to leave. But before they could retreat, a gunshot rang out, echoing across the valley. Jasper Cole emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with rage. He held a rifle in his hands, aimed directly at Silas. "You think you can meddle with my plans and get away with it?" Jasper snarled. "I warned you, old man. You're nothing but a thorn in my side." Silas raised his hands slowly, his voice steady despite the danger. "Jasper, this isn't about me or you. It's about the people of Redemption Ridge. Without that spring, they won't survive. Is that really the legacy you want to leave behind?" Jasper sneered. "Survival is for the strong, Silas, and I'm stronger than any of them." Before Silas could respond, Midnight reacted instinctively. The blind horse charged forward, his hooves thundering against the ground. Jasper stumbled backward, startled by the sudden movement. In that moment of distraction, Silas seized the opportunity. He dismounted and tackled Jasper, wresting the rifle from his grasp. The struggle was brief but intense. Jasper fought fiercely, fueled by years of resentment and bitterness. But Silas, hardened by a lifetime of challenges, prevailed. He pinned Jasper to the ground, his voice firm. "This ends now, Jasper. Enough lives have been ruined because of your pride." Breathing heavily, Jasper glared up at Silas. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant call of a hawk. Then, finally, Jasper nodded. "Fine," he muttered, "but don't think this changes anything between us." Word of the confrontation spread quickly through Redemption Ridge. The townsfolk gathered around Silas, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. Sheriff Thompson arrived shortly after, taking Jasper into custody. Though Jasper would face justice, Silas knew the scars of this conflict would linger. In the days that followed, Silas withdrew slightly, seeking solace in the quiet moments shared with Midnight. The townsfolk tried to express their gratitude, offering gifts and words of praise, but Silas accepted none of it. "All I did was protect what belongs to all of you," he told them simply. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the vast expanse above, Silas sat by the spring, watching the water ripple gently in the breeze. Midnight stood beside him, his head lowered as if listening to the whispers of the night. Silas smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. Life in Redemption Ridge would never be perfect. Challenges would arise and conflicts would persist. But as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, even in the face of adversity, the town and its people would endure. And so, under the watchful eyes of Midnight, the old cowboy continued to ride into the sunset, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The days that followed were marked by a quiet tension in Redemption Ridge. Though Jasper Cole had been taken into custody, his influence lingered like a shadow over the town. Some of the townsfolk, still swayed by his words, began to question whether Silas truly deserved the credit for their salvation. Whispers spread through the streets, carried on the wind like tumbleweeds, some praising Silas, others casting doubt upon his intentions. Midnight, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the unease. He nickered softly whenever someone approached, as if asking Silas what was troubling him. But Silas remained stoic, choosing instead to focus on the tasks at hand. He helped prepare fences, tended to the crops, and shared his knowledge with anyone willing to listen. Yet beneath his calm exterior, a storm brewed, a storm born of frustration and regret. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of amber and gold, Silas found himself alone by the spring. The water flowed steadily, its gentle rhythm soothing to the soul. He sat on a nearby rock, his hat pulled low over his eyes, lost in thought. Midnight grazed nearby, his movements slow and deliberate, as if mirroring the old cowboy's mood. It was then that a young girl named Lily approached. She was no older than 10, her braids swinging as she ran towards Silas. Her face was flushed with excitement, and in her hands she clutched a small wooden carving. "Mr. Silas," she called out, her voice filled with admiration, "I made this for you." Silas looked up, surprised. He took the carving from her, examining it closely. It was a crude but heartfelt depiction of midnight, his blind eyes rendered with surprising accuracy. A lump formed in Silas's throat as he realized the depth of gratitude contained within such a simple gift. "Thank you, Lily," he said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you know." Lily beamed, clearly pleased by his reaction. "I saw how you and Midnight saved us all," she explained earnestly, "and I wanted to do something to show how much we appreciate it." Her words struck a chord within Silas. For so long he had carried the weight of redemption alone, believing that his actions spoke louder than any praise or recognition. But perhaps, he realized, there was value in accepting the kindness of others, even when it came in the form of a child's gift. That evening, as the stars began to twinkle above, Silas gathered the townsfolk near the spring. Word had spread quickly about Lily's gesture, and many had come to see what Silas had to say. The crowd stood expectantly, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging from nearby trees. Silas cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "Folks," he began, "I don't stand here tonight to ask for anything. You've already given me more than I deserve, the trust, the friendship, the hope that we can build something better together." He paused, glancing at Midnight, who stood beside him, his ears twitching slightly. "But I also know that not everyone believes in what we've done. Not everyone sees the same path forward." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Silas raised a hand to silence them. "That's all right," he continued. "Doubt is part of life. What matters most is how we choose to act when faced with it. When the locust came, we could have given up. We could have let despair consume us. But we didn't. Instead, we fought back, not just for ourselves, but for each other." His voice grew stronger, resonating across the gathering. "Now, as we move forward, let's remember this lesson. Let's remember that even in our darkest hours, there's always light to be found, if only we're willing to look for it. And let's honor that light by standing together, no matter what challenges lie ahead." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the night. Tears glistened in the eyes of several listeners, including Sheriff Thompson, who stepped forward to shake Silas's hand. "You've done more than save this town, Silas," the sheriff said sincerely. "You've shown us what it means to truly live." In the weeks that followed, Redemption Ridge flourished in ways none could have imagined. The crops thrived, nourished by the abundant water from the spring. Trade routes reopened, bringing goods and travelers from distant lands. And with each passing day, the bonds between the townsfolk grew stronger, forged in the fires of adversity and nurtured by shared triumphs. Yet Silas remained humble, content to live quietly alongside Midnight. They often rode beyond the edges of town, exploring the vast expanse of the Wild West. On one such journey, they stumbled upon an ancient trail, nearly obscured by time and neglect. Curiosity piqued. Silas followed the trail, leading Midnight through dense forests and across rushing streams. As they ventured deeper, the landscape changed dramatically. Towering cliffs loomed overhead, their rocky faces etched with intricate carvings. Silas dismounted, running his fingers over the markings. They depicted scenes of battles, migrations, and celebrations, stories of people long forgotten, yet immortalized in stone. "What do you think, boy?" Silas murmured to Midnight, who whinnied softly in response. Could these be the remnants of another town? Another people who faced their own struggles? The realization struck Silas like a bolt of lightning. Perhaps the land held secrets far greater than any single person could uncover. Perhaps the true legacy of Redemption Ridge lay not in preserving the past, but in learning from it, and building a future that honored those lessons. Back in town, news of Silas's discovery spread rapidly. Intrigued by the possibility of uncovering hidden truths, the townsfolk banded together to explore further. Archaeologists and historians arrived from neighboring settlements, eager to study the carvings and piece together the mysteries of the ancient trail. Among them was a woman named Eleanor, whose keen intellect and unwavering determination impressed Silas greatly. "You've got quite the knack for finding things, Mr. Silas," Eleanor remarked one evening as they sat around a campfire. The flames danced merrily, casting flickering shadows across their faces. "First of spring, now this trail. Makes me wonder what else you might stumble upon." Silas chuckled, leaning back against a log. "Maybe it's not about stumbling," he replied thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about looking where others refuse to, about trusting your instincts, even when they lead you somewhere unexpected." Eleanor smiled, her eyes gleaming with understanding. "Or maybe," she added mischievously, "it's about having a horse who knows more than he lets on." Midnight snorted indignantly, causing both Silas and Eleanor to laugh. From that moment on, the two formed an unlikely friendship, united by their shared curiosity and respect for the unknown. Time passed, and Redemption Ridge continued to evolve. New buildings rose where old ones had crumbled, and fields once barren now teemed with life. Yet through it all, Silas remained a constant presence, a reminder of the resilience that defined the town. Even as younger generations began to take the reins, Silas offered guidance when needed, his wisdom sought after and cherished. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted lazily to the ground, Silas stood atop a hill overlooking Redemption Ridge. The town stretched out below him, vibrant and alive, its people thriving under the watchful gaze of the mountains. Beside him, Midnight stood tall, his breath misting in the cool air. "I guess this is it, boy," Silas said softly, his voice tinged with pride. "We did it. We showed them that even the weakest among us can change the world, if only we believe." For a long moment, he simply watched, taking in the beauty of the scene before him. Then, turning to Midnight, he patted the horse's neck affectionately. "Let's ride, shall we? There's still plenty of wild left to explore." And with that, the old cowboy and his blind horse set off once more, disappearing into the horizon as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their journey was far from over, but their legacy would endure forever, a testament to courage, loyalty, and the power of hope in the face of uncertainty. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into seasons. Redemption Ridge flourished under the watchful eyes of its people, who had come to understand that their survival depended not on individual strength, but on unity. The ancient trail discovered by Silas became a focal point of exploration and learning, drawing scholars and adventurers from far and wide. With each new discovery, the town grew in knowledge and prestige, cementing its place as a beacon of resilience in the Wild West. Yet, amidst this prosperity, Silas found himself increasingly drawn to the quiet solitude of the open plains. The bustling energy of Redemption Ridge, while heartening, felt distant from the life he had once known, a life defined by freedom and the endless horizon. Midnight, too, seemed restless, his ears twitching to call the wind and the whisper of distant lands. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Silas stood on the edge of town, gazing out toward the unknown. The air carried the scent of pine and earth, mingling with the faint sound of laughter from the saloon behind him. He turned to Midnight, who stood patiently beside him, his head lowered as if listening to the same whispers of the wilderness. "Boy," Silas murmured, "I think it's time we remembered why we started riding in the first place." Midnight lifted his head, his blind eyes seeming to gleam with understanding. Without another word, Silas saddled the horse, securing only the essentials for their journey. He didn't tell anyone where they were going, or if they would return. Some might have called it reckless, but Silas knew better. This wasn't about leaving. It was about rediscovering. As dawn broke over the plains, the world stretched endlessly before them, a canvas painted in shades of gold and crimson. The land was untamed, its beauty raw and unfiltered. Silas and Midnight rode steadily, their path dictated by the instincts of the horse and the pull of the unknown. They crossed rivers so wide they seemed to touch the sky, climbed mountains whose peaks kiss the clouds, and wandered through forests so dense that sunlight barely pierced the canopy. It was during one such journey, deep within a forest shrouded in mist, that they encountered something unexpected. A young boy, no older than 12, sat huddled beneath a tree, his clothes torn and dirted from days spent alone in the wilderness. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but there was a spark of determination in them that caught Silas's attention. "Hello, son," Silas said gently, reining Midnight to a halt. "What brings you so far from home?" The boy hesitated, clearly wary of strangers, but hunger and exhaustion eventually won out over caution. "My pa, he got hurt," the boy explained haltingly. "We were hunting, and then he fell. I tried to help him, but—" His voice cracked, and he wiped furiously at his tears. "I don't know what to do." Silas dismounted, kneeling before the boy. "Where's your pa now?" he asked softly. The boy pointed toward a nearby clearing. "He's back there. He told me to go for help, but I couldn't leave him. I promised I'd stay." Moved by the boy's courage, Silas placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did right staying with him, son. Now, let's get you both some help." With Midnight's guidance, they navigated the treacherous terrain until they reached the clearing. There, lying against the base of a fallen log, was the boy's father, his face gaunt and his breast shallow. Silas quickly assessed the man's condition, noting the broken leg and signs of fever. Working swiftly, he fashioned a makeshift splint and administered what little medicine he carried. "You're going to be all right," Silas assured the man, though his voice betrayed the gravity of the situation. Turning to the boy, he added, "We need to get him to a doctor. Can you ride with us?" The boy nodded fervently, relief washing over his features. Together, they loaded the injured man onto Midnight, who bore the extra weight with surprising ease. Silas led them back through the forest, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. It wouldn't be easy getting medical attention from the man, but Silas was determined to see it done. Days later, after navigating countless obstacles, rivers swollen with rain, cliffs too steep for even Midnight to climb, they finally reached a small mining town nestled in the foothills. The townsfolk, though initially skeptical, rallied around the trio upon hearing their story. A doctor tended to the man's injuries, and food and shelter were provided for all. As the man began to recover, gratitude swelled among the townsfolk. They offered Silas rewards, money, supplies, even a plot of land, but he refused them all. "All I did was what anyone should do," he insisted. "Now, I've got a horse waiting and a trail calling." Reluctantly, the family bid farewell, promising to never forget the kindness shown to them. As Silas and Midnight departed, the boy ran alongside them for a moment, his eyes shining with admiration. "You're like a hero, Mr. Silas," he exclaimed, "like the ones in the stories." Silas chuckled, patting Midnight's neck. "Heroes are just people who choose to act when others might hesitate. That's all." Their journey continued, taking them farther north, where the air grew colder and the nights longer. Winter approached, bringing with it challenges of its own. One particularly harsh storm forced them to seek refuge in an abandoned cabin, its walls weathered by time and neglect. Inside, they found remnants of a life long past, a faded quilt draped over a chair, a rusted lantern hanging from the ceiling, and a journal resting on a dusty table. Curious, Silas opened the journal, its pages brittle with age. Within, he discovered the story of a family who had once called the cabin home. They had faced hardships similar to those endured by the townsfolk of Redemption Ridge, droughts, locusts, and bandits, but had persevered through sheer determination and cooperation. The final entry spoke of hope, of leaving the cabin behind to start anew, trusting that better days lay ahead. Tears pricked at the corners of Silas's eyes as he read the words. He closed the journal, placing it carefully back on the table. "There's something about this land," he whispered to Midnight, "something that keeps pulling us forward, no matter how hard it gets." When the storm subsided, they left the cabin, carrying with them not just the memory of its former inhabitants, but also the lessons they had learned. Each step they took brought them closer to understanding the true essence of the Wild West, not as a place of danger and hardship, but as a crucible of growth and transformation. Spring arrived, heralded by the blooming of wildflowers and the songs of birds returning from migration. Silas and Midnight found themselves near a vast canyon, its walls carved by millennia of wind and water. Standing at the edge, Silas marveled at the sheer scale of the landscape. "Look at that boy," he said, his voice filled with awe. "All this beauty, all this history, and yet it feels like we barely scratched the surface." For hours they stood there, watching the sun rise and set, painting the canyon in ever-changing hues. It was during one such sunset that Midnight suddenly froze, his ears perking up. Silas followed his gaze, spotting movement in the distance. A group of riders approached, their forms silhouetted against the fiery sky. At first, Silas tensed, ready for trouble. But as the riders drew nearer, he recognized their faces: the sheriff, Eleanor, and several townsfolk from Redemption Ridge. Relief washed over him, though he couldn't fathom why they had come. "Sheriff," Silas greeted gruffly, tipping his hat. "What brings you out here?" The sheriff dismounted, his expression serious but warm. "We came to find you, Silas. The town misses you." "We miss you." Eleanor stepped forward, her arms laden with supplies. "And we thought you might need these. You've been gone a long time, and winter was harsh." Silas shook his head, chuckling. "You folks always did worry too much." "I'm fine." Midnight seized to that. "But it's not just about worrying," the sheriff interjected. "It's about family, about standing together, no matter where life takes us." A lump formed in Silas's throat as he realized the truth of the sheriff's words. Redemption Ridge wasn't just a town. It was a collection of souls bound by shared experiences and mutual respect. And though he had sought solace in the wilderness, part of him had always yearned for the connection he had found there. That night, under a sky scattered with stars like diamonds, Silas made his decision. He would return to Redemption Ridge, not as a savior, but as a member of a community that had grown to mean more to him than he had ever admitted. Midnight, sensing the change, nickered softly, his blind eyes reflecting the light of the campfire. The journey back was bittersweet, filled with memories of places seen and lessons learned. When they finally reached Redemption Ridge, the townsfolk gathered to welcome them, their cheers echoing through the streets. Silas dismounted, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "I guess this is home," he murmured to Midnight, who whinnied in agreement. And so the old cowboy and his blind horse settled once more into the rhythm of Redemption Ridge, their spirits enriched by the adventures they had shared and the bonds they had forged. Life in the Wild West would always be unpredictable, but as long as they faced it together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome.